I want you all to imagine this. A man is driving down a road with 20 penguins in his back seat. A police officer stops him and says that he cannot drive around with the 20 penguins in his back seat and that he should take them to the zoo. The man agrees and drives off. The next day, the same man is driving down the same road with the same 20 penguins in his back seat again. The same police officer stops him and says, "Hey, I thought I told you to take those to the zoo." The man replies, "I did. Today I'm taking them to the movies." A joke like this can easily be overlooked, but in the grand scheme of things, is incredibly beneficial. Humor and laughter are so common and instinctual, but many people do not realize the psychology and science that it involves. Humor is especially involuntary in me, as I rely on it to not only cope with stress and adversity, but also to avoid uncomfortable situations. I'm sure many people here also use humor to deal with awkward circumstances. When anyone brings up the topic of spontaneous humor, I can only think of the first presentation I've ever done in my life. It was in the 5th grade. The English teacher had assigned a presentation project on optimism in mid-October and gave us a calendar that showed the presentation days in mid-November. Similar to what the majority of students do all the time, I procrastinated. Not only did I procrastinate until the week before, but I procrastinated until the day before. By the time 7 rolled around the night before the presentation, I realized I was screwed. I was completely exhausted, and I didn't want to work on the presentation. So I did the introduction and conclusion in an hour, and told myself that I would do the main body paragraphs, which was the actual information, at school when I had the chance. Being the dumb person that I am, I didn't take into account that I had this class just 2 hours after the morning bell, and it was my second class of the day. With my luck, I didn't have any time in my first class to work on it. To this day, I still don't realize why I wasn't stressed at this point. I walked into my English class with a plan. I would get on a computer and secretly work on the body paragraphs. Good plan, right? At least that's what I thought. The teacher explained that she would randomly pick a name from a jar, and that would determine the order of the presentations. Now I want to ask, how many of you think I finished this project in time for the presentation? Well, guess what? The teacher called on me first. First! I think this is the first time I've ever been afraid of my own name. My face turned red, my palms became sweaty. I was a 5th grader. I wasn't experiencing these kind of situations. I hesitantly stood up and walked to the front of the classroom. Now I know many of you are wondering, it's just a 5th grade presentation, it doesn't matter at all. And now that I'm a freshman in high school, I completely agree. But back then, this determined if I went on to a good college or a bad college. It finally became the time for me to speak, and I talked. I went through the introduction swiftly, but when I came to my main body paragraphs, I blanked. I could hear the gasp from my peers when they saw my blank slides, and I could see my teacher in the corner at her desk, shaking her head and writing something down on her rubric. I quickly apologized and the room fell silent. Suddenly, out of nowhere, I just said, "Knock, knock." The room was so confused, and I was too. It just came out of my mouth. One of my friends replied, "Who's there?" And I said one of the only jokes that I could even think of. The interrupting cow. Moo! The room filled with laughter, and I was surprised to find out that my teacher was cracking up as well. I then sat down back in my seat and waited for class to end. The thing is, I wasn't even embarrassed or sad about my presentation. If anything, I felt happy. The next week, we got our grades back. Amazingly, I didn't even fail. I wasn't even unhappy about the grade because I learned something from that day. I learned that I love to make jokes, and I learned that I rely on humor, even if it's random, to make people laugh, which ultimately makes me positive and people around me positive. It is not rare for humor to induce positivity just as it did in this instance. In fact, humor is an unbelievable cure to negative outcomes such as health issues. Humor can be used to cope with mental illnesses such as stress and depression. People who have access to their sense of humor in the midst of these situations are much more resilient than the rest of us. They are more emotionally flexible and can bend without breaking in the most difficult circumstances. One study showed that just a 5-session workshop was enough to improve adults' use of humor to cope with life stress. Humor as a defense mechanism can be indicative of a psychological recovery. Though it is a defense mechanism to keep an individual from feeling a pain associated with the trigger, it is actually found to reduce the amount of pain that an individual suffers. Nervous laughter is one form of this defense mechanism, which occurs when someone laughs at a terrible sight or awkwardly points something out for comedic purposes. It is a psychological response that, while socially inappropriate, shields a person from having to face uncomfortable emotions. Then there's self-deprecating humor, which is when someone pokes fun at themselves. This can be charming, as it is seen that this person has a sense of humor, but it can also highlight low self-esteem and many insecurities. In this sense, in the context of self-deprecation, humor gives people an opportunity to joke about themselves before others have an opportunity to do so. Another very popular form of humor that is often hated on, which I use very often, is sarcasm. Sarcasm can be used to belittle or mock others. In this sense, sarcasm gives In this sense, sarcasm is used as a defense mechanism to direct aggression towards another individual under the image of comedy. Psychologists believe that people who use humor at the expense of others are often defending against their own insecurities. However, some humor can be taken the wrong way and seen as controversial. Finding humor in the face of adversity is a defense mechanism that can be used for both good and evil. Spinning a traumatic experience in a way that can provide comedic relief might just be an effective alternative to antidepressants, whereas poking fun at another person's expense during an awkward circumstance can prove to be destructive. Some humor should not be funny based on the content, but somehow produces laughter. I sometimes wonder why people find the discomfort and pain of others funny. Why people falling and hurting themselves is considered funny. Why saying something in a particular way is funny. Why wordplay is funny. Laughter is so common, it's so beneficial because it doesn't take much for one to laugh. Laughter really is the best medicine. Many wonder how this popular phrase came about and will be surprised to hear that, scientifically, laughter is incredibly beneficial for one's health. Laughter decreases stress hormones and increases immune cells and infection-fighting antibodies, which increases one's resistance to disease. Laughter triggers the release of endorphins, which are the body's natural feel-good chemicals. Endorphins cause an overall sense of well-being and can also temporarily relieve pain. Laughter brings about brain-region connectivity, which kicks in when we hear a laugh, as we work to decipher what kind of communication is coming through. Laughter can even be used as a medicine for things that people don't believe it can be used for. Laughing activates the release of the neurotransmitter serotonin, the same brain chemical affected by the most common types of antidepressants. Research has shown that laughter has an anti-inflammatory effect that protects heart muscles and blood vessels from the terrible effects of cardiovascular disease. Though it isn't clear on how this happens, It is related to the lessening of the body's stress response, which is directly linked to increased inflammation. Regular, cheerful laughter should definitely be a part of every heart disease prevention program. These programs have the ability to be incredibly successful when humor is involved. Humor can and should be used as a defense mechanism on a daily basis for any issue, and produces laughter that can have a positive mental and physical effect on people's life. Thank you.